All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us on Vintage Books Live. Tonight, we're very excited to have Anita Kelly with us. Their brand new book is out today, which is very exciting. Sometimes we get to talk to people on release day. I know I have mine. Usually I have to have the author show me the book because I don't necessarily have it here at home, but this one I have at home. So, but yes, so Anita's been with us before. We were talking about her previous book. So it's very fun to have them back to talk about how you get the girl. So why don't you start out by just telling us a little bit about this particular book, without spoilers, like a little bit about what it's about, and then we'll
Yeah.
go from there.
Yeah. So it is technically the third book in my series that started with Love and Other Disasters a few years ago. But it can also be read alone. All the books in the series can be standalone reads as well. And this one is a romance between Julie and Elle. Julie is a high school basketball coach, in addition to working like an admin job that she doesn't care about. And one day in her gym, Elle walks in, who was her like childhood basketball hero. And so she's freaking out a little bit, but it turns out that Elle is currently the foster parent of one of the students on her team. And so they end up once Julie kind of gets over being starstruck, they end up coaching the team together. And then some like practice dating ensues after that because it's a romance novel.
Yes.
Um,
Yay.
and yeah, I think that about sums it up. So I call it sports adjacent
Yes.
uh,
Well,
because,
that actually segues nicely
yeah,
into the next question because one thing that I really love about your books is like some rom-coms. I mean, every rom-com has a setting and things that are happening and stuff. But what I love about yours is like they're kind of all in on the setting. So, the first one, Love and Other Disasters, it's a cooking, it's cooking
hmm
related and you're all in on that setting. And then something wild and wonderful, they're on the Pacific Crest Trail, which is obviously the big part of the story. And this one's
yes.
a sports book, and I love that. And I'm curious how, like, each setting are they all something that are either really familiar to you or to people that are close to you? Is that kind of how you were able to really dive in, or did you just pick something and go, I'm gonna figure this out?
Yeah, so like looking back at this series, now that I know a little bit more about writing books, I still would not consider myself an expert. But like when I sold this book series, I've sold all three books at once. Um, and I was still really like learning how to plot a novel. And yeah, so pretty much I call this like my personal experience, like because basically like, each book
Yeah,
was like
yeah.
written on personal experience that I knew I could write about. um like I know there's authors who are actually really insistent on like not placing the author's personal experience too much in the book, like it's all about craft. And but I'm still not good at that. I like need to write about things that I have personal experience with.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so like the first book was all about food and I love food. And the second book, I have hiked a bit of the Pacific Crest Trail. And then the third book, I had always pitched it as being a basketball book. And that is really mostly due to my wife, who is she's
I
a
saw
huge,
that
yeah,
being referenced in the acknowledgments in the back, and I was like, aha.
yeah. So like I am not a basketball player. I've never played basketball. But she is from Chapel Hill, which is the home of UNC, where Michael Jordan went to college, if you didn't know. And college basketball is like, like
That,
a
that's a big deal.
culture of the town. Yeah, and so
Yeah.
she really grew up like, just immersed in basketball all the time. So it was a really big part of her life. And so kind of via osmosis, I have learned a
Yeah.
lot about basketball through her. Um, and then we were also foster parents before we adopted our child. And so that was where that storyline came in as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So one day I will run out of things from my own life to write about, and then I'll have to like figure out what to do. But yes, that's kind of
Yeah.
where
I
like
think
I
that's
feel like this one's
interesting
strange
though.
because there's so many like different threads in this one.
Yeah.
And so I've always been like a little nervous about it because it still feels like kind of a funny book to me, but of all the different threads that are in it. But
Yeah.
yeah, they're all through different things from my life.
Yeah. I don't know though. I mean, it's not wrong when you said that, authors try to not like be too identified with what's going on in their book, but that whole thing of, write what you know,
Right. Yeah.
it's like there's always you're familiar with something aspect of a book that you're writing about, or you've made yourself familiar about it.
Right.
Which I think is it's just interesting to see. I guess it just struck me because I think of other rom-coms that I've read and really enjoyed, and it was more the setting isn't as important. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It's more of a backdrop. Whereas for your books and others, like, what's going on is also a big part of what's happening in you couldn't do something Wild and Wonderful without the Pacific Crest Trail. Like it just, that was
Right.
so much a part of that story.
Yeah, and that's
So
another reason why writing this one was different from the first two, because like you said, like the setting and circumstances of the people in the first two were so essential to the story. And so this was kind of my first book where um people were just living their regular lives, like,
yeah,
going
yeah,
to work and taking care of their families and um, Nashville, which where this book takes place, is
yeah,
essential to the story, but um, they were kind of less bound by the setting and their circumstances. So that was a new, yeah, writing experience for
yeah,
me.
yeah. And Nashville, like the other thing is that it is a series, but you don't like I am Love and Other Disasters is absolutely on my list of things to read, but I haven't read that one. I've read Something Wild and Wonderful, and I knew that they were all connected loosely, but and then I started reading this one, it was like, okay, wait, I think this is a character from one of the other books when she talks about the assistant coach not being there. And so yeah, but it
Yeah.
certainly isn't. It certainly you can enjoy it without having read any of the other books at all. But I love that they are so interconnected. Was that part of the original pitch when you pitched it, that they were kind of interconnected?
Not really, actually. So I had we're selling Love and Other Disasters as my debut. And then my agent said again, like I when we were selling Love and Other Disasters, I really knew nothing about any of this process. It's been a learning experience. And so she was like, we have some editors who are interested. Do you have any other book ideas that I can tell them, that you also have ideas, ready to go after this one? And so I kind of pitched the next ideas that became Something Wild and Wonderful and then How You Get the Girl. So I had those in the background,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then all of a sudden it was like, okay, you have a 3-book series. And I was like, oh, okay, it's a series. And so then, I mean, honestly, I think I always did have Julie in mind for this book. So I guess I did kind of always think that they would be
Yeah,
in the same universe. But once I knew that they were being sold as a series, then I really kind of worked to see how the different characters in the books
yeah.
would be connected from that first book going on. And it was actually really fun.
What
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit, because and this is more like, you know, it's the author's version of policy wonk stuff. Like some people are gonna be like, oh my gosh, really? But I'm always curious to ask because I think that it's something that people don't think about is like when you're working to sell your first book, like there's usually a lot of time and energy and possibly years and probably more than one draft. And you finally sell the first book, and then suddenly you're committed for three books that you've gone, oh, yeah, I can write a book about that and a book about that. What was that like for you as a writer to be like, oh, okay, now I have to write these other two books?
Yeah, so I feel like my situation with all three of these books was pretty lucky in that I did feel like I had a lot of time to work on each of them. Now that I'm kind of like more in the I don't know what I want to say the meat grinder. It's not a meat grinder, but
Yeah,
now that I'm
yeah,
now that I'm in
yeah,
the
yeah,
publishing machine and I'm like,
yeah,
okay, what do I sell something next? I've got a book a year.
yeah,
Like now I am feeling more pressure to write on a timeline,
yeah,
which is very stressful. But
yeah, yeah,
especially with your debut, typically, you have a finished draft for a long time before that gets published because you have to have a first draft to try to get an agent.
yeah,
And that could take a long time. And then your agent has to sell it to an editor. And then even once you sell it to an editor into a publishing house, as a debut, you're kind of like the least important, so they can put you into the publishing schedule whenever works for them. And so sometimes that's not a year or two and after you sell it. And so kind of while we were in the process of selling Love and Other Disasters, I was working on something wild and wonderful. And then, so there was always like a waiting
yeah,
period where then I was working on the next thing. And I feel like I really had time to work on
yeah,
each thing, that I feel less and less of now the longer I'm in publishing, and that is
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Yeah. How You Get the Girl was an interesting, probably the most interesting situation of the three because I'd had a first draft that I submitted to my editor, after Something Wild and Wonderful was done. And I kind of knew that it wasn't right. Like it didn't feel like a good draft to me. And uh my editor agreed. Or I think what I have to do is I have to submit like a detailed outline first. But I had already
oh,
basically written,
yes, yeah,
yes,
yeah,
I had basically already written the whole thing. But I sent my editor like, a detailed outline of what was in this draft. And she was like, yeah, maybe we have to change this around, which I already knew was
yeah,
going to be the
yeah,
answer. So then I basically had to rewrite the whole thing in a shorter amount of time than I had
yeah,
with the
yeah,
first two. And then the editing turnaround was kind of fast for it too. So yes, I did feel a little bit not rushed, but more like
yeah,
in
yeah,
okay, like this is my job now. I have deadlines,
yes,
like as opposed to when you never even quite know if you're going to get a book
yeah,
published and it's
yeah.
just
I
something
mean,
you're
there's
doing for fun. Yeah, it
it's
feels different.
stressful in different ways
Yeah.
before and after, but I think that, we talk about this among, I've had writing groups where those of us who have been published sit around and talk about it. It's like how you don't want to discourage anyone, but there's a different kind of stress after you start selling books, and that is,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, now I have to produce.
Right.
Um, you don't want to talk about that too much to someone who's like pre-sale because you don't want to, it's like, well, so sad that you have these problems, it's
Right.
but
Right.
it
Like,
is, it's stressful. And I think that a lot of people, it's a struggle sometimes when because life is happening at the same time
mhm.
you're trying to write
Yeah.
books. And
And
so
once you're published too, like now that this is my third book, I feel more experienced with what it's like to be a published author, but it is also a different experience. Yeah, because you don't want to complain about anything.
yeah,
Once you're published, it does feel very privileged. But when I sit down to write, I always do try to get back to like my unagented,
yeah,
unpublished self. Like
yeah,
who
yeah,
I was before any of my books were published, when I was just writing for myself, because I mean, that's really how I should still be writing.
yes,
But
yeah,
now that I know what it's like to be published, I'm always thinking of who's the audience for this? How's it going to be
Yeah.
marketed? How's it
Yeah.
going to be received? What are people going to say on Goodreads? So like that stuff is
Yeah.
all in the back of your mind,
It's
and
hard. Yeah, it's hard not to.
it gets into your process. So I always try and like remember what it was like before
Yeah.
and write from that space.
Yeah. Well, that sort of segues a little bit again into the next thing I was going to ask you about is rom-coms have a particular like formula feels like the wrong word because it's not, that feels really negative to say it that way, but they do have like expected beats.
Hmm.
And I'm always curious, like as a nonfiction writer who is terrified by the idea of writing fiction, I'm like, I'm always curious, like, how do you keep yourself from falling into um repetition? Like, because you're gonna hit particular beats usually.
Right.
Because those of us who love them would be sad if they didn't.
Right.
But also you want it to be new and fresh and be a new story. And I'm just curious, how does that work? Is that something where you think about that, you just get the bones of the story out and then you think about making sure that, or is that something that just sort of happens organically along the way?
Yeah. So I think like having those bones of what makes a romance, like those beats that you said, are really helpful to me in crafting the basic outline of a book. And I think what helps kind of the insecurity of am I just telling the same story again, is being a romance reader and having read 100 different romances that follow the same beats, and knowing that I love every single one and that every single
Yeah,
one
yeah,
does end up feeling different in its own way. And it's really, you take the same beats, but it's the characters
yeah,
that
yeah,
make each story different. And I'm a very character driven person, so that is helpful for me in crafting the book. But then even within the beats, I think especially as romance gets more and more popular, there's debates about how those beats should go. There's debates about whether there should be a third act breakup or not,
yeah,
and so
yeah,
I think there is more, as the genre gets more popular, but also more diverse, which I should just say, like in a traditional publishing
yeah,
wise,
yeah.
because self-pub romance has been doing all kinds of
Yes,
stuff for years.
yes, yeah,
But yeah, I think people deviate from the beats a little bit more or experiment with
yeah,
them a little bit more. Um, for me, it's not necessarily, the beats that I worry about being similar to other books, uh, but it's just like the content.
yeah,
Like when I was publishing Love and Other Disasters, which is a foodie rom-com with a non-binary character. I learned about TJ Alexander's book, Chef's Kiss, that was coming
yeah,
at the same time, which was a foodie rom-com with a non-binary character. And I was like, oh, okay, well, but then I read their book and
yeah,
it was so different from mine. And
yes, yeah,
and so I had
yeah,
to go through that experience of being like, oh yeah, there's a million different stories within,
yeah,
one construct that can be told. So
yeah,
I always kind of feel for the authors who do write kind of like not rom-coms, like write very like unique books that can't necessarily be put into a box, but then are put into the rom-com box because that is
yeah,
what will sell them.
yeah, yeah,
Um, I've read a few books like that where I'm like, oh, this was such an interesting, fascinating story. And I know it's going to be marketed as a rom-com, and that is not what it is.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's kind of a detriment to the author and to the readers. But
Do you feel like
anyway,
I'm super curious to get your perspective on this because um I actually have a favorite author, T. Kingfisher,
oh,
who
uh-huh.
writes both traditionally published and self-published. And so she's a really interesting study in what is like viable from a traditional publishing standpoint as far as what traditional publishing thinks is viable and
Yeah.
stuff that she ends up having to publish on her own. I think one of her series that I love Um, she said, she sold it as a rom-com, but they told her there were too many severed heads and that it would never make it as a rom-com. I was like, oh, come on. But I'm
Yeah,
wondering just your, like off the cuff opinion, because I didn't prepare you for this at all. But do you feel like sometimes traditional publishing gets a little bit too rigid in the types of stories that it wants to tell? That there aren't boxes for something that maybe doesn't quite fit. So then they try to shoehorn it, somewhere else. And
for sure. Yeah, absolutely. But it's kind of a problem where, uh, I can't exactly place blame on any one person.
yeah, yeah,
Like something that I think, all writers right now are kind of sick of is like the tropification of
yeah,
literature to like, instead of listing plots, we just list like bullet points of tropes. And
yes,
and like bullet points of tropes don't make a good book. It's just a bullet list of
yeah,
point of
yeah,
tropes, like but at the same time, those tropes do sell copies. And so,
yeah,
and so I can't
yeah,
get mad at marketing departments for being like, okay, what are your tropes? Because that's what sells books. That's what sells books on TikTok. And so, um, yeah, and like for right now, the big thing, like T. Kingfisher writes such interesting, yeah, like hard to classify stories. And so it makes me think that right now a lot of the like marketing focus is on romantasy,
yeah,
this new word
yeah,
that's been made
for
up,
sure.
everyone
Yeah,
wants to be the next Sarah J. Maas. And so I have a few friends who have fantasy books coming out that are now like being labeled like romantasy, and they're like, what? I mean, the romance is
yeah,
kind of there,
yeah,
but it's not
yeah,
really like a romance. It's yeah,
yeah.
there's like corpses and it's like not, but that's how they're gonna
Yeah,
sell it.
yeah.
So,
Well, and I think that's the challenge too, is that it is such a like marketing driven, and that could be marketing from the actual publishing house or marketing from like people on TikTok who are
right.
essentially playing essentially filling the role as marketing people by
Hmm.
creating all this content around these books. And sometimes I think some of the really gorgeous and fabulous stories get kind of lost because they don't get found by the right, TikToker or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And
um,
every now and then one does, one really kind
yeah,
of just
yes,
odd book finds its way to the
yes,
masses, but
for
which is
sure.
wonderful to see. But yeah, I think more often so many wonderful books just get kind of lost. And
Yeah.
yeah, like I said, like no one part of the machine's fault really,
No,
but
it really
it
isn't.
just
It's
kind of happens.
yeah, yeah, because it's like, well, of course they're gonna, if that's what people say they want, of course they're gonna market to that. Like they'd be
Yeah.
silly not to. And so no,
Right.
you
Hmm.
can't really identify and say, oh, you're the bad guy. You got to stop doing that because it's a business. And I think that's the other thing that sometimes people forget is it's a business. They need to make money. They've got to pay their people. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's been really interesting for me from the book selling end of it to see that
Hmm.
part of it of like out there going, no, you should really buy this book. It's so great.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
missing out.
And that's why we love booksellers so much, because booksellers really are like the piece, outside of the cog of publishing that can
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
a weird little book and sell it, to so many people. So it's really important to have
Yeah.
that
And to be fair, I mean,
actual human in the middle selling the book. Yeah.
the folks out on TikTok have actually done that for a lot of weird, fun little books that maybe
Yeah,
wouldn't have otherwise.
for
So,
sure.
so it's not necessarily that's not necessarily a bad thing either. But so I'm gonna switch the conversation a little bit, um, because I'm looking at this book and looking at your website and I like the catchphrase "queer kissing books." It just made me really happy. And I'm just it's been a rough year. out there in the land. And we,
Mhm.
without diving too far into all the stuff that's going on, I'm curious how you maintain creative energy for writing, particularly obviously for you, but anything else too, with all the hard stuff that's just in our faces all day, every day. That just, do you have things that you do? Are there ways that you kind of have to just center yourself to kind of push that all away? But writing in the face of stuff,
Mhm.
whether it's
Mhm.
personal or just news, are there ways that you've found to kind of deal with that?
Man, I wish I had better ways to deal with
Yeah,
that, but
well, I
I do,
know.
yeah, especially the last few months. I feel like I really have to compartmentalize.
Yeah,
And when I sit down to write, just, shut everything else out. And sometimes that feels like a selfish act, but it's also, if I just sat in all the bad stuff 24/7, like I would be extremely unwell and not be able to do
yeah,
anything. Like not just write, but like not take care of my family or, and so I kind of balance that within myself, knowing that mental health wise, it's important for me just to focus on something not awful
yeah,
for a
yeah,
while. And and when I see like a lot of the awful things happening in the world, like no matter what it is, I'm always kind of struck with, like how am I helping? Like how can I
yeah,
help the world
yeah,
be a better place? And like as simple as it is, like writing happy endings and queer happy endings and like things that bring people comfort, I like to think is important. And
yeah,
so I think part of the way I motivate myself to keep writing is like, well, this is important in its own small way, of continuing to bring people comfort and hope. And so that's kind of how I,
yeah, yeah.
tell
Well,
my,
that
which,
actually, honestly, you just kind of jumped into answering the next question, which was the role of fiction in all of this. And I think for me personally, that's exactly how I feel about it, is just giving people a way to be away from it for a while. But
yeah,
I think the other thing is that I find helpful for me is just the more we see all different people, living
right,
their lives, finding love, finding happiness, going through the same stuff that all the rest of us go through.
right.
It only serves to make things better a little bit at a time. But
Yeah. And I have found myself leaning more the last year or so too on nonfiction as well. Like fiction is a great escape, but nonfiction can kind of, like when I'm wanting to learn more about something, nonfiction, when I sit down with a nonfiction book, with just one person calmly explaining to me the
yeah,
facts, as opposed to just doom scrolling or, watching all these, wild headlines on TV, it calms my blood pressure. And I'm like, okay, there are facts and things I can learn about this, and other people have studied this, and there's people smarter than me, who are trying to solve these issues. And so that has also been like soothing to me. So books in general, like
yeah, yeah,
whenever my brain starts to get too overwhelmed with the world, I
yeah,
I try and step back to a book of some kind, whether
yeah,
that's nonfiction or fiction these days, to help get me back to base level. Because you also can't really process everything that's happening in the world,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
from like a heightened
right.
place of, being overwhelmed with all of it. So you kind of have to do something to regulate yourself again to try to actually process it better. So reading for me has been that.
Do you find that you have, the word that pops to my head is like ritual, but it doesn't have to be that formalized. Do you find that you have ways to like enter into the space that you need to be when you're writing? Do you have things that you do to kind of get there?
Yeah. I don't have as like some writers have a very ritualized
Yeah, yeah.
schedule. I'm not as much, but I do tend to always write in the same spot, actually exactly where I'm sitting right now. Um, and so writing in the same spot really helps me get into the right mindset. I know that I have to write kind of first thing in the morning or like my brain power just goes away. Like even if I sometimes wait just like a little bit too late, like until 10 o'clock or something, my
Yeah.
brain power is already gone. Um, I have extra right next to me. I have this little timer, um, and which I think Kate Claiborne first posted about using this timer when she writes. And so I bought it for like $5 on Amazon, and it really does help. Like setting like, okay, I'm just gonna write for an hour.
Ooh,
And like
there's
forcing,
color.
yeah, there's so
My
this
brain likes
is
that.
yeah, and then it goes down. It's so
That's great.
yeah, and so it's yeah, it's so this is actually really helpful. Like even just having it next to me, like I know that I have to be focused because the
Yeah,
clock is
yeah.
on.
I really
Um
like the visual of that. That's kind of cool.
yeah, I always have to have tea with me.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah,
so always writing in the same
yeah,
spot,
yeah,
having a comfort beverage and something that keeps you focused. I mean, there's all different types of like productivity apps
yeah,
and things like that
yeah,
as well for when you're writing, like things that block all of your other apps on your phone. And so yeah, there's lots of different tools to use. But yeah, and I find sometimes, just if my brain isn't working, it's not working well that day.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
no matter what I do,
Sometimes you just have to say, not happening.
yeah, like there's some people that, make themselves right at 6 a.m. every day.
Yeah, yeah. I can't
I
imagine that's way too early for me. I'm like, no, no, I'm not human at 6 a.m. in the morning.
yeah, so I've tried to be kinder to myself as time has
Yeah,
gone by and just
yeah,
know that if it's not working that day, I'm just
yeah,
going to continue to be more frustrated and upset at myself with the quality of my words if I keep trying. So I can just try again tomorrow.
yeah. I probably asked you in the last interview, but I can't remember. Are you someone that like finds the story as you go, like pantses it? Are you somebody who like plans it out ahead of time?
I think I am more of a pantser than I am a plotter. I do have to have some type of basic outline, and premise to know what I'm doing. But yeah, my favorite moments are when like I'm starting a chapter and I'm like, I know the basically what they're doing in this chapter, but I don't know
Yeah,
exactly how it's gonna go. And then just writing and then
yeah,
it just magically
yeah.
happening.
That's
That's
so cool.
always, the best discoveries that just kind of come
Yeah,
as you're
yeah,
writing. But for me, I tend to only learn who my characters are through writing them. So I know, like I was listening to a podcast with Ashley Herring Blake, and she was talking about how she basically has, the entire book plotted. But she spent like a long time making her outline, and she knows everything about her characters, everything about the book before she starts writing. I just can't quite do that in my own
yeah,
head,
yeah,
and so I need to actually start writing the characters before I really understand who they are. And sometimes I don't fully understand who they are until, over halfway through the book. But then
yeah, yeah,
once it clicks, I'm like, okay, now I know what I'm writing.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so I feel like I kind of need that, yeah, figuring it out as I go
Process.
along
Yeah.
process. Yeah.
I love asking that question because every single person, whether they identify themselves as a plotter or a pantser, is like some unique variation of that. Like not
Yeah.
no two people are like exactly the same. Some people are like, I just jump in and I write the whole thing and I don't plan anything. And some people are a little bit of both. And it's just
Yeah.
fun to talk to people about how they do that.
Like I actually find I have a spreadsheet where I have, the different beats that I'm supposed to hit and, the chapters and how long everything's taking and the basic action in each chapter. And so I always, start out with that and have like, the first few chapters mapped out, and then I'll start writing. And then I find that I actually go back to the spreadsheet the most, like in the middle, because the
Yeah,
middle is a tricky part of a book.
yeah, yeah.
And so
Yes, for
I
sure.
want to make sure that like things aren't taking too long, and that you know, and like I basically I use the spreadsheet for like pacing to make
Yeah,
sure that I still have enough time left to just tell everything else I want to tell, and I haven't taken too long to tell the first half of the book. And
yeah,
so I start to use my spreadsheet a lot in the middle to make sure I'm moving at an okay pace.
yeah. Do you find that you do quite a lot of editing then after, or does that process of sort of figuring it out in the middle kind of keep it pretty tight?
Yeah, I'm a person that edits a lot as I go.
Yeah.
Too, like I guess I could say I'm a clean drafter because I I'm too neurotic to not be.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes, it's like a lot of my writing sessions are reading what I wrote, the previous day or the previous week, and remembering and like editing that as I'm rereading
yeah,
it, and
yeah.
then going from there.
Right.
And I almost always, when I get to like the 75% mark or like almost towards the end, I normally stop and then read the whole thing that I've written from the beginning until that point, because I want to like remember what I've written and what I want the book to be about,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that helps me end it. Like I want to make sure I end
I
it
love that. That's
strongly.
so cool. Yeah.
And so to be sure that I'm ending it correctly and strongly, I like remind myself
Yeah.
what I just spent the last 8 months writing. And
Yeah.
then I'm normally able to finish it.
Yeah. That's another piece too that I just think is everybody's slightly different. Lanny Taylor, um, the author of Daughter and Smoke and Bone in that series,
Yeah.
just posted this last week something that I then reposted about, how, you know, writers often get advice about how they're supposed to do things. And one of the advice tends to be, just write your terrible first draft and, you
Yeah.
got
I
to push
can't.
through, you got to do push through. And her whole point was if that was how I had to do it, I wouldn't have written anything because she's like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And and I loved that she came out and said that because I really feel like for any writer, like you have to find your own way that works for you. You can't follow whatever as some other person says. Like you can try it and see if it works, but
Yeah.
maybe it won't.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I know. I've often like thought about that piece of advice. I know other writers that are able to sit down and just write a crappy draft in a week, and then they go from there. And I'm not saying that I don't have a lot of editing to still do after my
Yeah,
first
yeah,
drafts. Like
no.
I do. But yeah, I've just never been able to move that fast. I have to take my time and like
Yeah,
edit a
yeah.
lot as I go for my brain to function, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
No, just think it's cool that everybody's so different.
yeah. Yeah, because
The
it
only time
all
I get grumpy is when
differently.
someone's like, this is how you have to do it. This is the only way. And it's like, no, 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 no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something then we can just actually close, like this will be like the second to the last question and let you go for the night because we're getting up there. But
Yeah.
uh, on your, I said this earlier, but on your website you have queer kissing books, and I love that. I'm curious what drew you to the rom-com genre or the romance genre to begin with. I mean, that something that you were purposeful about or something that you just sort of fell into because that's what felt right to write?
Yeah, I really kind of fell into it. I did not grow up a romance reader. I grew up kind of like a literary snob. And I went to school, to undergrad for writing, and read a lot of wrote a lot of like literary type things. Um, and so it was only like recently in my adulthood that I got into romance. And I think I just heard a few recommendations for various books from different readers that I knew. Um, and then I just like fell headlong in love with it. Because I think it had been a long time since I had remembered that reading like could be fun and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and escapist and um yeah, and there's just so much about romance that I just loved. And all the romance readers and writers that I met were just like completely unpretentious and just like
Yeah.
loved, just like loved unabashedly the romance genre. And I just loved that kind of pureness. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, and so it was right around that time that I was getting back into writing fiction. I spent a long time not writing fiction, even though it had been what I originally went to school for. But uh, yeah, and so like once I had read enough romance, I was like, well, I think maybe I could try writing this too. And so that was kind of what helped get me back into writing fiction, was falling in love with the romance genre as a whole. And so yeah, I feel like it was very serendipitous, I guess, that
Yeah.
I fell in
Yeah.
love with romance as an adult, that then also helped me tap into my creativity again. So yeah.
That's very cool. Well, we have a few people in the audience, so I'm just going to let you all know that if you've got questions, please feel free to post those in the comments. I'm going to ask Anita a couple of more closing questions, but if anybody wants to post something, I am watching the chat, so you can go ahead and put it in chat. There's a little bit of a delay between the live and the YouTube, so I will let that question sit for a minute so that people have a chance to look at it. And I was going to ask you if you have anything coming in the next year or two that we can keep track of, or if you're taking a little break.
Definitely not taking a break. I've actually been working on a ton of different things. I just don't know exactly what I can talk about.
Yeah, I was gonna
Um,
say, I
but
totally understand if you can't, because that's pretty
yeah,
normal.
well, this really, like this past year has been a huge, again, learning experience because this was my first time. Okay, so I've finished these three books. I've finished my publishing contract in this series. Like, what next?
Yeah,
And so,
yeah,
and that has not always gone as smoothly as I
yeah,
anticipated.
it's hard.
So it's been a lot of up and down of figuring out what is coming next. But I did just announced the other week I do have a young adult romance coming out in
Okay, cool.
2025.
Yay.
I think it's currently slated for summer 2025. So that's a whiles away. I know some
Not
people
really
off
in publishing land,
no.
but in real people land, it's a little while.
Yeah. And I had so much fun writing that one. It takes place at a donut shop in a made-up small town in Oregon.
Oh, awesome. I
So
love it.
we're in small town Oregon, and between a girl and a non-binary character. And yeah, I had so much fun writing them. But I'm hoping to maybe like self-pub something in between now and
Yeah,
then
yeah,
in the adult sphere. So I'm also hoping to do more adult books and traditional publishing as well. So
yeah,
I'll get
yeah.
back to you when I know more. But
Yeah, that's okay. No, that's part of the publishing space is that
yeah,
sometimes things are coming, but you can't say, or you can say, but
right.
there's no cover yet, and yes, so whatever.
I
But
know.
yeah, we'll just that's okay. We'll wait. We'll be excited when it comes. And then definitely if you want to let people know where to find you online, and I know you have at least one other event coming up in Vancouver. Now that one's not necessarily like that's, I think you're the interviewer for that one.
Yeah,
Coming up a little
actually,
bit later,
yes.
but yeah, anything you've got coming up in the local area, Portland's fine too. I would love to know about it so that we can post about it in the comment section of the video.
Yeah, so coming up at the end of March, I'm doing an event in Nashville at Parnassus Books. So I'm excited to be
Yay.
in Nashville to celebrate this book. That will be very special. But then for local folks in Portland and Vancouver, I have actually, I don't know if they've all been officially announced, but I'm going to talk about all of them anyway. But in early April, like there's a string of three different events that I'm excited to be at. One is for Alison Cochran's new book. Again, I don't think that one has been officially announced,
Okay.
um, and it sounds like she and baby are doing well.
Yeah.
So
Yay.
I think the event in April should be going off without a hitch. But yeah, so there will be something for Here We Go Again,
Okay.
where I'll
So
be
we will
chatting.
watch for that, and when we see it, we'll post it.
Yeah.
See it
And
officially.
and then I'll also be chatting with Jen Comfort for
Yes, that was the one I saw just today, and I was like, oh, wait, Anita's doing that.
yeah, so for her new book, What is Love? And that will also be in Vancouver. And then KT Hoffman's debut novel, The Prospects, which is like my favorite book ever.
Oh, yes, I
Um,
forgot
I'll
that.
be I'll be talking with him also in April at Powell's. So yeah,
Yay.
so I'll be like all their conversation partners and mostly focusing on those books, but but I'll be around to sign my books as well
Okay.
afterwards.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so if anyone wants to see me, I'll be around a lot in
Okay.
April.
Okay. And do you have any in-person stuff for this book, or just the ones where you're partnering with the other writers?
Yeah, no in-person
Okay.
things here
Okay.
locally for
Just
this
the
book.
Nashville.
Yes, I
Right.
for some reason I just wanted to like lay low with this one.
No,
And
I
so
that's completely fine. Well, and you're not exactly laying low. It's just that it's
no,
like
it's true.
full dual events. So
Yeah.
when is the one for What is Love with Jen?
That one I'm pretty sure
April
is April
6th?
6th.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that one I wanted to call everybody's attention to because it's pretty cool that if you love romance books, we actually have a little just romance bookshop in Vancouver now. Not us vintage books, but like another bookstore called Romance Era,
Yeah,
I think.
Romance Era.
Um,
Yes. So they're
and
organizing that one.
um,
Yeah.
I have not yet had a chance to go down there. I have been meaning to since she opened. Um, but one of these days I'm gonna get over there. But we're just like super excited. There's several new little bookstores around in Clark County, and it might seem weird that we're excited, but I mean we're excited because
Oh yeah.
the bookstore selection had fallen to basically just a couple in the last, prior to COVID. And so it's been very fun to see that sort of blossom again in the area. And it's super fun to see the romance era um, having the specialty shop pop in has been really
Yeah.
fun. She is in, I believe it's called the Franklin Building. Um, and so yeah, that Anita's going to be hosting Jen Comfort, who is a
Hmm.
Portland author, on April 6th. I will be reposting that on social media. So if you're plugged into vintage bookshop on Instagram or Facebook, you'll see it pop up. And probably Allison's as well, because we love Allison. So
Yeah.
we post all of her stuff no matter where it is.
Hmm.
And I'm actually super excited about the KT Hoffman book coming up too, because I've actually read the arc of that one. So
Oh,
that'll be
it's
fun.
so good, right?
Yeah.
So good.
Another sports book. If you like romance and you like sports,
Yes.
it's another sports romance. So that one's
And
very,
that's like full throttle sports, that
yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, so we'll just be watching for all of these as they pop up. We'll post them in our stories on Instagram for sure. Yeah, and so yay. And where can people find you online?
Oh, I'm mostly on Instagram.
Okay.
Anita Kelly writes. I'm no longer on any like text-based apps, which makes me sad because that's like where I really like want to
Yeah,
be.
yeah.
Like I work best in text-based things. So I'm no longer on X. I tried Threads for a while and then like had to get off of it because it was just not good for me. And I'm on TikTok and occasionally I post like a rambling video of
Yeah, that's kind
myself,
of how we are too on TikTok. I'm
but
like, I don't think
I
I have this figured out yet.
yeah, like I know I'm not using it.
I'm
Like
too old.
I know I don't know how to like do like funny like video edits. Like I
Yeah,
just
exactly.
so I'm on TikTok. I think just Anita Kelly or Anita Kelly writes too
Okay.
there. I don't even know my username.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm not very good at it. So just warning you if you follow me
Yeah.
there. But
Well, thank you so much, Anita. I really appreciate you being with us. I'm so excited about the book. I'm going to show it again. Everybody, we have signed copies at the store, and there's even a little cute little bookmark with the dog and the cat on them.
yes,
So
I just want
pop
to
on
say
by
thanks
if you want a
to,
copy.
yeah,
Yeah.
I just want to say thanks to everyone who has been so kind about, yeah, about this, book release and the whole series. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Anita. I hope you have a great rest of your release day and a good night.
Thank you. I hope you have a good night too. Thank you for doing this.
And see you later, everybody.